The Duke gave his wife the diamonds, but handed the governess a rusty key. It opened the 50 Merriweather Vault, Chapter 1. I have learned that the quietest gestures often carry the heaviest meaning. And on the night the Duke of Montclair pressed a rusted key into my palm, I understood that silence itself could be a confession. It was the autumn of 1867, and I had lived at Ashford Hall for 5 years, though I still walked its corridors like a ghost, uncertain of her right to haunt. I came as a governess, charged with the education and refinement of the Duke's 2 nieces, Miss Helena and Miss Arabella. They were bright, willful creatures who tested my patience and earned my affection in equal measure. I taught them French and watercolors, music and deportment, and when they married well and departed for their new lives, I remained. No one asked me to leave. No one asked me to stay. I simply existed in the gray space between servant and guest, too educated for the kitchen, too poor for the drawing room. My name is Evangeline Thorne, and I was born the daughter of a country vicar in Devonshire. My father gave me books instead of dowries, philosophy instead of prospects. When he died, the living passed to a distant cousin, and I found myself at 22 with nothing but my education and a letter of recommendation from the bishop's wife. That letter brought me to Ashford Hall, to the sprawling estate in Hertfordshire where the Ashford family had reigned for 3 centuries. I arrived expecting employment. I did not expect to lose my heart to a man I could never have. Lord Edmund Ashford, the 7th Duke of Montclair, was not the sort of man who invited warmth. He stood 6 feet tall with dark hair silvered early at the temples, and his eyes were the color of winter storms. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it seemed an act of reluctant concession rather than joy. The servants whispered that he had been different once, before the death of his younger brother, before the weight of the title settled upon his shoulders. But I only knew him as he was, remote, exacting, and possessed of a quiet authority that silenced rooms. I should not have noticed him as anything other than my employer. I should not have catalogued the way he paused at the library window each evening, watching the sun descend behind the oaks. I should not have felt my pulse quicken when his voice, low and measured, addressed me by name. But loneliness makes fools of us all, and I had been lonely for so very long. The Duchess, Lady Cordelia, was everything I was not. She possessed golden hair that caught candlelight like spun silk, a figure that gowns were designed to adorn, and a laugh that rang through ballrooms like crystal bells. She came from the Beaumont family, old money grown thin, and her marriage to the Duke had been an arrangement of mutual necessity. He needed an heir. She needed a fortune. Society called it a perfect match. I watched her glitter at dinner parties, diamonds cascading from her throat like frozen tears. The Duke had given her the Ashford jewels on their wedding night, a collection so famous that ladies traveled from London merely to glimpse the Duchess wearing them, the sapphire tiara, the ruby parure, and most magnificent of all, the diamond necklace that had once belonged to a queen of France. Lady Cordelia wore them with the easy confidence of a woman who believed she deserved every beautiful thing the world could offer. Yet, for all her radiance, she never looked at her husband with tenderness, and he never looked at her at all. I should have left Ashford Hall when my duties ended. A respectable woman would have sought another position, another household, another cage with different gilded bars. But Lady Philippa, the Dowager Duchess, had asked me to stay. She claimed she valued my companionship, my steady presence, my ability to read aloud without stumbling over the French passages in her beloved novels. I suspect she simply enjoyed having someone who listened more than they spoke. Lady Philippa was 73 years old and sharp as a blade newly forged. She had buried 2 husbands and 1 son, and grief had carved her face into something both beautiful and terrible. She saw everything that happened in Ashford Hall. I sometimes wondered if she saw too much. It was she who first noticed the way the Duke's gaze lingered on me. We were in the morning room, she with her embroidery and I with my correspondence, when she spoke without looking up from her needle. I have observed, Miss Thorne, that my grandson watches you as a starving man watches bread behind glass. I do hope you have the sense not to let him break the window. My cheeks burned. I did not know how to respond. She was accusing me of nothing and everything at once. "He is devoted to his wife," I said, though the words tasted like ash. Lady Philippa laughed, a dry, papery sound. "He is devoted to his duty. There is a difference, child. Cordelia is a duty. You, I fear, are becoming something else entirely." I wanted to protest. I wanted to insist that nothing improper had ever passed between the Duke and myself, and that was the truth. He had never touched me beyond the brushing of fingers when I handed him a book. He had never spoken words that could be construed as anything other than proper. But absence of action is not absence of feeling, and Lady Philippa knew it. I resolved that very afternoon to seek another position. I would write to the agencies in London. I would find a household far from Hertfordshire, far from the storm-colored eyes that haunted my waking hours. I would do the right thing, the sensible thing, the thing that would preserve both his reputation and my soul. But that night, the storm came. It began as an autumn gale, the kind that strips leaves from branches and sends servants scurrying to check the shutters. By midnight, it had become something more, a roaring, living thing that shook the windows and turned the world beyond the glass into a chaos of rain and wind. I could not sleep. I lit a candle and tried to read, but the words swam before my eyes, meaningless shapes that refused to become language. I heard footsteps in the corridor. At Ashford Hall, the family slept in the east wing, and the upper servants in the west. My chamber was positioned between them, a small room that had once belonged to a lady's maid. I should not have heard anyone walking at such an hour, yet the footsteps were unmistakable, slow and deliberate, pausing at my door. I held my breath. A knock came, so soft it might have been the wind. I rose, pulling my shawl tighter around my nightgown, and opened the door. The Duke stood before me, still dressed in his evening clothes, though his cravat hung loose and his dark hair was disheveled. He held a candle in one hand, and the flame cast shadows across his face that made him look younger, more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. "Miss Thorne," he said, and his voice was rough, as though the words had to fight their way out. "Forgive the intrusion." I stepped back, uncertain whether to invite him in or demand he leave. Propriety screamed at me to do the latter. But something in his expression silenced propriety entirely. "Is something wrong, Your Grace?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small object, which he pressed into my hand without ceremony. His fingers were cold, and they trembled. I looked down. It was a key, old iron, rusted at the edges. It looked like something that might unlock a gardener's shed or a forgotten cellar door. "I do not understand," I said. He met my eyes, and in that moment, the mask he wore for the world slipped away. I saw exhaustion beneath it, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "Keep this," he said. "Tell no one you have it. When the time comes, you will know what it opens." "Your Grace," I began, but he shook his head. "Not now." He stepped back into the corridor, and the shadows swallowed half his face. "There are things I cannot explain, Miss Thorne, things I should have attended to long ago. But I have watched you for 5 years, and I know what you are. You are honest, you are brave, and you are the only person in this house I trust." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, his footsteps disappearing into the darkness. I stood in my doorway until the candle burned down to a stub, staring at the rusted key in my palm. It weighed almost nothing, yet it felt as heavy as a secret. I did not sleep that night. In the morning, the storm had passed, leaving the grounds littered with broken branches and scattered leaves. I dressed carefully and went down to breakfast, expecting, I do not know what I expected. Some acknowledgement, perhaps, some explanation. But the Duke was not at breakfast. Lady Cordelia presided over the table in a gown of pale lavender, complaining prettily about the noise of the wind that had kept her awake. Lady Philippa ate her toast in silence, watching me with those knowing eyes that missed nothing. "You look tired, Miss Thorne," the dowager said. "Did the storm disturb your rest?" I murmured something about the wind and the shutters. She did not believe me. I could see it in the slight curl of her lips. After breakfast, I retreated to my chamber and examined the key more closely. It was old, certainly, perhaps 100 years or more. The iron was rough with age, and the bit was shaped in an unusual pattern I had never seen before. I tried to imagine what lock it might fit, but Ashford Hall contained 1,000 doors, and I knew perhaps 1/10 of them. I hid the key in my jewelry box, beneath the strand of pearls my mother had left me. It was the only thing of value I possessed, and I thought the key would be safe there, nestled among the memories of a gentler time. For 3 weeks, nothing changed. The Duke treated me with the same distant courtesy he had always shown. Lady Cordelia ignored me as she always did. The household continued its stately rhythms, and I began to wonder if I had dreamed the entire encounter. Then Mr. Basil Whitmore arrived. He came in a black carriage on a gray afternoon. A tall man with a long nose and spectacles that made his eyes look owlish. He was the family solicitor, Lady Philippa told me, and he visited twice yearly to discuss matters of estate. But there was something different about this visit. I saw it in the way the servants whispered, in the way Lady Cordelia's smile grew brittle at dinner. On his 3rd day at Ashford Hall, Mr. Whitmore sought me out in the library. "Miss Thorne," he said, removing his spectacles to polish them on his handkerchief. "Might I have a word?" I set aside my book and nodded. He sat across from me, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You were governess here for several years, were you not? You know this house well. Reasonably well," I agreed, "though it is vast, and there are wings I have never entered. Have you ever heard mention of the old vault?" I felt the key pressing against my thoughts, though it lay hidden in my chamber. "What vault do you mean, sir?" He studied me for a long moment. "The 4th Duke," he said finally, "was a man of considerable paranoia. He feared revolution, invasion, the collapse of the banks, and so he created a hidden vault, somewhere within this estate, where he stored a portion of the family fortune. Gold, jewels, documents of immense importance. When he died, the location died with him. His son searched for years and never found it." I kept my expression carefully neutral. "And you believe it still exists?" "I am certain of it," Mr. Whitmore said. "The 4th Duke's private papers reference it repeatedly. The vault exists, Miss Thorne, and according to my calculations, it contains assets worth approximately £50 million. The number was so staggering that I could not comprehend it. £50 million. It was a fortune beyond imagining, enough to build hospitals and schools, enough to change the fate of nations." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because the Duke trusts you, Mr." Whitmore said simply. "He asked me to ensure you understood what is at stake." He rose, adjusting his spectacles, and paused at the library door. "Find the vault, Miss Thorne. Find it before someone else does." I sat alone in the library for a long time after he left, my mind racing. The key. The rusted key the Duke had given me. It must open the vault. But where was the vault? And why had the Duke entrusted its secret to me rather than his wife, his grandmother, his solicitor? I thought of Lady Cordelia's diamonds glittering at her throat. I thought of the Duke's haunted eyes in the candlelight. I thought of Lady Philippa's warning about starving men and glass windows. And I realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air, that I was standing at the edge of something far larger and more dangerous than a forbidden love. The key in my jewelry box was not merely a gift, it was a test, and I did not yet know what I was being tested for. The Duke gave his wife the diamonds, but handed the governess a rusty key. It opened the 50-meter vault. Chapter 2. I began my search the following morning, armed with nothing but questions and a heart that beat too quickly whenever I passed the Duke in the corridors. Ashford Hall was a labyrinth of history. The original structure dated to the reign of the First Elizabeth, a modest manor house that had grown over centuries into something vast and sprawling. Each generation of Ashfords had added their own wing, their own tower, their own secret passage. The fourth Duke, the paranoid one who had built the vault, had lived during the turbulent years of the French Revolution. He had watched aristocrats lose their heads across the Channel and determined that his family's fortune would never fall to the mob. But where would such a man hide his treasure? I spent my days exploring the parts of the house that duty had never required me to enter. I walked the long gallery where portraits of dead Ashfords watched me with eyes that seemed to follow. I descended into the wine cellars where bottles lay sleeping in the darkness like rows of patient soldiers. I climbed to the attics, where broken furniture and forgotten trunks gathered dust beneath the rafters. Everywhere I went, I tested doors. Some opened easily, others were locked, and I tried my rusted key against them, but it never fit. The key's unusual shape matched none of the locks I found, and after a week of searching, I began to despair. Lady Philippa noticed my restlessness. "You pace like a caged creature." "Miss Thorne," she observed one afternoon. We were in her private sitting room, where she spent most of her hours now that winter approached. "Are you troubled?" I considered lying, but her gaze was too sharp. She would see through any deception I attempted. "I am searching for something," I admitted, "something I was asked to find." The dowager set down her teacup with a delicate clink. "And does this something have anything to do with my grandson's midnight visit to your chamber?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "You know about that." "Child," she said, not unkindly, "I know everything that happens in this house. The floorboards outside your room creak. I heard him walking. I saw the state of him at breakfast the next morning, as though he had not slept in days." I did not know what to say. The truth was too dangerous, and lies seemed pointless. Lady Philippa studied me for a long moment. Then she sighed, and something in her expression softened. "You remind me of myself," she said quietly. "When I was young and foolish and in love with a man I should not have wanted." I opened my mouth to protest, but she raised a hand. "Do not insult us both with denials. I have watched you watch him for 5 years, Miss Thorne, and I have watched him try not to watch you. It is a very old story, and it rarely ends well." "I have done nothing improper," I said, and my voice trembled. "I know you have not. That is what makes it all the more tragic." She turned to look out the window, where gray clouds gathered over the bare trees. "Edmund is not happy. He has not been happy since the day he married Cordelia. I warned him against the match, but he was determined to do his duty, to save the family from financial ruin. And now he pays the price for his honor, day after day, in a marriage that offers him nothing but appearances." "Lady Cordelia is very beautiful," I offered. "Beauty is common," the dowager replied. "Kindness is rare. Cordelia possesses the former in abundance, and the latter not at all." I thought of the Duchess, of her glittering laughter and calculating eyes. I had never seen her perform a single act of genuine warmth. She was charming when it suited her, and indifferent when it did not. The servants feared her sharp tongue. Even her lady's maid, a nervous young woman named Fanny, seemed to tremble in her presence. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Lady Philippa turned back to face me. "Because I am old, Miss Thorne, and I have learned that secrets poison everything they touch. Whatever Edmund has asked you to find, I hope you find it quickly. There are forces at work in this house that you do not yet understand." Before I could ask what she meant, a knock came at the door. It was one of the footmen, announcing that Lady Cordelia requested my presence in the blue drawing room. I had never been summoned by the Duchess before. My heart sank as I made my way through the corridors, past the suits of armor and the towering portraits, toward the room where she waited. Lady Cordelia was seated on a velvet settee, a vision in cream and gold. Her diamond earrings caught the firelight, and her smile was the smile of a cat watching a mouse approach. "Miss Thorne," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her. "Do sit down." I sat, folding my hands in my lap to hide their trembling. "I understand you have been exploring the house," the Duchess continued. Her voice was pleasant, almost musical, but there was an edge beneath the melody. The servants tell me you have been opening doors, climbing stairs, venturing into places where a former governess has no business going. I am fond of the architecture, I said carefully. I have always admired the history of Ashford Hall. Have you? Lady Cordelia's smile widened. How charming. And here I thought you were searching for something specific. The room felt suddenly colder. I forced myself to meet her gaze. I do not know what you mean, Your Grace. She laughed, a crystalline sound that held no warmth. Come now, Miss Thorne. We are both intelligent women. Let us not play games. She leaned forward, and her perfume washed over me, heavy and sweet. I know about the vault. I know my husband has been seeking it for years, and I know that he trusts you in ways he does not trust me. There was something terrible in her eyes, something hungry and hard. Whatever he has told you, she continued, whatever he has given you, I want you to understand something very clearly. I am the Duchess of Montclair. This house, this fortune, this name, they belong to me, and I will not allow a penniless governess to take what is mine. I am not trying to take anything, I said, and my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Then prove it. Lady Cordelia sat back, her expression smoothing into pleasantness once more. If you find the vault, you will tell me immediately. Not my husband, not his grandmother. Me. Do we understand each other? I understood perfectly. She was threatened by me, though I posed no threat. She was greedy for the fortune, though she already possessed more wealth than most people could imagine. And she was dangerous in a way I had not fully appreciated until this moment. Of course, Your Grace, I said, because there was nothing else I could say. She smiled again, satisfied. Excellent. You may go. I left the blue drawing room with my pulse pounding in my ears. I had made an enemy today, and I did not even know how or why. The Duchess saw me as a rival, but a rival for what? The vault? Or something more personal? I thought of the Duke's eyes in the candlelight. I thought of his trembling hands and his whispered trust. And I realized, with a sinking certainty, that Lady Cordelia suspected her husband's feelings for me. Perhaps she had seen what Lady Philippa had seen. Perhaps she had watched him watching me. The diamonds he gave her could not buy what he had given me, a rusted key and his confidence, and she hated me for it. That evening, I could not face dinner. I pleaded a headache and remained in my chamber, staring at the key in my palm. The iron was cold against my skin, and I turned it over and over, searching for some clue I might have missed. There were markings on the handle, I realized, faint, almost invisible, worn nearly smooth by age. I held it closer to the candle and squinted. Letters, tiny letters, engraved into the iron. S.A.D. I whispered them aloud, trying to make sense of them. They could be initials. The fourth Duke's name had been Sebastian Ashford, according to the family records I had glimpsed in the library. Sebastian Ashford, Duke, S.A.D. But what did it mean? The initials confirmed that the key belonged to the fourth Duke, but they did not tell me where to find the vault. I set down the key and pressed my hands to my temples. Think, Evangeline. Think. The fourth Duke had been paranoid, Mr. Whitmore had said. He feared revolution and invasion. He would have hidden the vault somewhere secret, somewhere no invader would think to look. Not in the obvious places, not in the cellars or the attics or the locked rooms. Somewhere unexpected, somewhere symbolic, perhaps. I thought about what I knew of Sebastian Ashford. He had lived during the French Revolution. He had watched the terror from across the Channel. He had been obsessed with protecting his family's legacy. And then, like a bolt of lightning, I remembered something. The chapel. Ashford Hall had its own private chapel, a small stone building set apart from the main house. It was rarely used now as the family attended services in the village church, but it dated to the original Elizabethan manor, and it was consecrated ground. A paranoid man who feared revolution might believe that sacred ground offered protection. A man who wanted to hide his treasure might choose a place that invaders, particularly godless revolutionaries, might hesitate to desecrate. I grabbed a shawl and slipped out of my chamber. The corridors were dark and quiet, the household already retired for the night. I moved like a shadow, avoiding the creaking boards Lady Philippa had mentioned, and let myself out through the servants' entrance. The night was cold and clear, the sky blazing with stars. My breath misted in the air as I crossed the frost-touched lawn toward the chapel. It stood silhouetted against the darkness, its small spire pointing toward heaven like a stone finger. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the empty pews. The altar stood at the far end, draped in white linen that had yellowed with age. The air smelled of old wood and older dust. I walked slowly down the aisle, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Where would a vault be hidden in a place like this? Under the floor? Behind the altar? In the walls themselves? I reached the front of the chapel and knelt before the altar. The stone floor was uneven, worn smooth by centuries of worshippers. I ran my hands across it, searching for seams or irregularities. And then I felt it. A tiny gap between two stones, invisible to the eye but perceptible to the touch. I traced its outline and found a rectangle, roughly 3 feet by 2 feet, set into the floor just before the altar steps. My heart hammering, I pulled out the key and searched for a lock. There was none visible, but when I pressed on the center of the rectangle, I heard a faint click, and a small panel slid aside, revealing a keyhole so old and tarnished it was nearly invisible against the dark stone. The key fit perfectly. I turned it, and the rectangle of stone shifted, rising slightly from the floor. I grasped its edges and lifted, and a wave of cold, stale air rushed up to meet me. Below was a narrow staircase, descending into absolute darkness. I had found the vault, but I had not come prepared to explore it. I had no lantern, no candle, nothing but the moonlight that could not penetrate the depths below. I would have to return another time, properly equipped. I lowered the stone back into place and withdrew the key. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I knew where the vault was now. 50 million pounds, hidden beneath a chapel floor for nearly a century, and I was the only one who knew. I turned to leave, and my heart stopped. A figure stood in the chapel doorway, silhouetted against the stars. I could not see the face, but I recognized the shape. Tall, broad-shouldered, still as death. "Miss Thorne," said the Duke of Montclair, "it seems you have found what I hoped you would find." He stepped inside, and the moonlight fell across his features. He did not look angry. He looked relieved. And beneath the relief, there was something else, something that looked almost like hope. The Duke gave his wife the diamonds, but handed the governess a rusty key. It opened the 50 Manors Vault, Chapter 3. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The moonlight painted everything in silver and shadow, and the Duke stood before me like a figure from a dream, too real and too impossible all at once. "You followed me," I said at last. "I watched you leave the house." He moved closer, and I could see the tension in his jaw, the careful control he maintained over every muscle. "I had to know if you would find it. You could have told me where to look. I could have." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the rise and fall of his breath in the cold air. "But I needed to know if you could discover it on your own. I needed to know if I was right to trust you. And now you know. Now I know." His voice dropped, becoming something softer and more dangerous. "You are remarkable, Miss Thorne. I have employed scholars and investigators for years, men who claimed expertise in architecture and history. None of them found what you found in a matter of weeks. I did not know how to respond to his praise. It warmed me in ways it should not have, and I felt the familiar ache of wanting what I could not possess. "We should explore the vault," I said, forcing practicality into my voice, but I came without a light. The Duke reached into his coat and produced a small lantern, which he lit with a match from his pocket. The flame flickered to life, casting a warm glow across his features. "I came prepared," he said, and something like a smile touched his lips. "Shall we?" I knelt and lifted the stone once more, revealing the narrow staircase that descended into darkness. The Duke held the lantern high and went first, his broad shoulders barely fitting between the ancient walls. I followed, my hand trailing along the cold stone for balance. The stairs were steep and uneven, worn by time and moisture. I counted 23 steps before we reached the bottom, emerging into a chamber that stole my breath. The vault was larger than I had imagined, perhaps 30 feet across and twice as deep. The ceiling arched overhead like the nave of a cathedral, supported by stone pillars carved with symbols I did not recognize. And against every wall, stacked upon shelves and piled in corners, was treasure. Gold gleamed in the lantern light. Coins spilled from rotting chests, their edges dulled by age, but their value unmistakable. Jewelry lay scattered across velvet-lined boxes, emeralds and rubies catching the flame like drops of frozen fire. Silver candlesticks stood in rows, tarnished black but still beautiful. And everywhere, there were documents, leather-bound ledgers and sealed letters and scrolls tied with ribbon that had faded from red to pink to nearly white. "Dear God," I whispered. The Duke stood beside me, and I heard the sharp intake of his breath. "I knew it existed," he said quietly. "I never truly believed I would see it." I walked forward in a daze, my fingers brushing across the nearest chest. The wood crumbled at my touch, revealing a cascade of gold sovereigns that clinked against each other like tiny bells. "50 million pounds, Mr. Whitmore had said. Looking at this chamber, I thought he might have underestimated. "Why did you want me to find this?" I asked, turning to face the Duke. "You could have searched yourself. You could have hired more experts. Why give the key to me?" He set the lantern on a stone pedestal and met my gaze, because I could not trust anyone else. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual formality. "My wife wants this fortune for herself. She has made that abundantly clear. My grandmother, much as I love her, would use it to restore the family's political influence, to buy seats in Parliament and favors at court. And the experts I hired were in the pay of men who would see the Ashford name destroyed." I stared at him. "You have enemies?" "Every great family has enemies, Miss Thorne." He moved closer, and the lantern light threw his shadow long and dark against the treasure-laden walls. "There are those who would take everything we have, who resent our wealth and our position. And there are those within my own household who care nothing for the family legacy, only for what they can take from it." I understood then what he was telling me. He was alone, surrounded by people who wanted something from him, and he had no one he could trust. Except me. "I am nobody," I said softly. "A vicar's daughter without fortune or connections. Why would you trust me with something so valuable?" He reached out, and for one breathless moment I thought he would touch my face. But his hand stopped inches from my cheek, hovering in the space between us like a question he dared not ask. "Because you are the only person in 5 years who has wanted nothing from me," he said. "You have never asked for favor or advancement. You have never flattered me or schemed for my attention. You have simply been honest and kind and present, day after day, expecting nothing in return." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. I had expected nothing because I knew I could have nothing. I had kept my distance because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. "Your Grace," I began, but he shook his head. "Edmund," he said, "when we are alone, I would hear my name from your lips. I could not. It was too intimate, too dangerous. If I called him by his Christian name, I would cross a line I could never uncross. But the word escaped before I could stop it. Edmund." He closed his eyes, and something like peace settled over his features. Then he stepped back, and the moment passed. "We must catalog what is here," he said, his voice steadying. "I want a complete inventory before we decide what to do with it. Can you assist me?" I nodded, grateful for the distraction of work. of course. We spent the next 2 hours examining the vault's contents. I found a quill and ink among the supplies the fourth Duke had stored, and I began to list everything I could identify. The gold alone was staggering, thousands upon thousands of coins from a dozen different nations. The jewelry included pieces I recognized from historical accounts, items thought lost during the Revolution, smuggled out of France by refugees who had later sold them to Sebastian Ashford for a fraction of their value. But it was the documents that interested me most. The ledgers contained records of investments, properties, and loans dating back over a century. Some of the names I recognized as prominent families who still held power in England. Others were foreign, continental aristocrats who had fled the terror and never returned. The fourth Duke had been a shrewd businessman, and his hidden fortune had continued to grow even in his absence. And then I found the letters. They were bundled together with a black ribbon, their seals unbroken. I hesitated before opening them, but Edmund nodded his permission, and I broke the first seal with trembling fingers. The letter was addressed to Sebastian Ashford, Duke of Montclair, and it was signed with a name that made my blood run cold: Lady Honoria Ashford, his wife. I read the letter aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. My dearest Sebastian, you have left me no choice. I know what you have done and what you have hidden. I know about the fortune in the vault and the secrets you keep locked away with it. You believe yourself safe, but I promise you this: the truth will come to light, if not in my lifetime, then in the lifetime of our descendants. The sins of the fathers will be visited upon the sons, and the Ashford name will answer for its crimes. I looked up at Edmund. His face had gone pale. What crimes? I asked. What did the fourth Duke do? Edmund took the letter from my hands and read it again, his brow furrowed. I do not know. There have always been rumors, whispers of something shameful in the family's past. But no one has ever known the truth. We searched through the remaining letters, but they offered only hints and accusations, never specifics. Lady Honoria had clearly known something terrible about her husband, but she had died before she could reveal it. The secret had been buried with her, locked away in this vault along with the gold and the jewels. We must find out what she meant, I said. If there are crimes in the family's past, they could be used against you. Edmund nodded slowly. The letters mention another document, he said, pointing to a passage I had missed. A confession, written in Sebastian's own hand. She says it is here, in the vault, hidden among the treasures. We searched for another hour, but the confession eluded us. The vault was vast, and the fourth Duke had been thorough in his concealment. Whatever sins he had committed, he had taken great pains to ensure they would not be easily discovered. Finally, exhaustion forced us to abandon the search. We climbed back up the narrow stairs, and I replaced the stone over the entrance while Edmund extinguished the lantern. The chapel was silent and cold, and the first pale light of dawn was beginning to touch the stained glass windows. I must return to the house before the servants wake, I said. If anyone sees me coming from here at this hour. I know. Edmund caught my hand, just for a moment, and the warmth of his touch sent a shock through my entire body. Evangeline, thank you. It was the first time he had used my Christian name. I wanted to weep. I will continue searching, I promised. I will find the confession. Be careful. His grip tightened briefly before he released me. Cordelia is watching you. She suspects something. I know. She confronted me yesterday. His expression darkened. What did she say? She demanded that I report to her if I found anything. She threatened me. Edmund was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was hard with something I had never heard before. My wife is capable of great cruelty when her interests are threatened. You must not underestimate her. I understand. No. He met my eyes, and I saw fear there, genuine fear for my safety. You do not. Cordelia comes from a family that has destroyed rivals for generations. They smile while they cut throats. If she perceives you as a threat to her position or her access to this fortune, she will not hesitate to ruin you. or worse. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning cold. Then what should I do? For now, continue as though nothing has changed. Let her believe you have found nothing. I will handle Cordelia. He turned and left the chapel, disappearing into the gray light of dawn. I waited several minutes before following, taking a different path back to the house. My chamber was cold when I returned, the fire having burned down to embers during the night. I rebuilt it with shaking hands and sat before the flames, trying to warm the ice that seemed to have settled in my bones. I had found the vault. I had stood beside the man I loved in a chamber filled with unimaginable wealth. And I had discovered that the Ashford family was hiding something dark, something that a duchess from a century past had vowed would one day be revealed. Lady Honoria's words echoed in my mind. The sins of the fathers will be visited upon the sons. What had Sebastian Ashford done? And how would his crimes affect Edmund, who had inherited not only his title, but apparently also his secrets? I did not know, but I was determined to find out, because I had realized something in that vault, something I could no longer deny. I was not searching for the truth merely because Edmund had asked me to. I was searching because I loved him, wholly and completely and without hope. I loved him in a way that made me want to protect him from everything, even the sins of his ancestors. And that love, forbidden and impossible as it was, had become the most real thing in my world. I would find Lady Honoria's proof. I would uncover the fourth Duke's confession, and whatever darkness it revealed, I would face it at Edmund's side, even if I could never truly be his. The Duke gave his wife the diamonds, but handed the governess a rusty key. It opened. The 50-meter vault, Chapter 4. 3 weeks passed, and the confession remained hidden. I returned to the vault whenever I could, slipping away in the dead of night when the household slept. Sometimes Edmund joined me, and we searched together by lantern light, speaking in whispers that felt like prayers. Other times I went alone, combing through chests and ledgers while the cold seeped into my bones and the silence pressed against my ears like a living thing. The fourth Duke had been meticulous in his paranoia. Every document was coded, every hiding place concealed within another hiding place. I found secret compartments in the walls, false bottoms in the treasure chests, even a hollow pillar that contained a collection of miniature portraits, each one depicting a woman I did not recognize. They were beautiful, these painted ladies, and I wondered who they had been to Sebastian Ashford. Lovers, perhaps, or victims. Lady Honoria's letters haunted me. I read them again and again, searching for clues I might have missed. She wrote of betrayal and theft, of lives destroyed and fortunes stolen. She accused her husband of crimes against innocent people, though she never named them. And she swore that justice would come, even if it took 100 years. What had he done? I posed the question to Lady Philippa one afternoon, as casually as I could manage. We were in her sitting room, and she was reading while I pretended to embroider a handkerchief. "You seem distracted, Miss Thorne," she observed without looking up from her book. "I have been thinking about family history," I admitted. "The fourth Duke, in particular. He seems to have been a complicated man." Lady Philippa set down her book and regarded me with those sharp, knowing eyes. Sebastian Ashford was many things. Complicated is perhaps too kind a word. "What do you mean?" She was silent for a moment, considering. Then she sighed. "There are stories," she said quietly. "Whispers passed down through generations. My late husband told me some of them, though he claimed not to believe them." "What sort of stories?" "Stories of how Sebastian acquired his fortune." She folded her hands in her lap, and her rings caught the firelight. "The fourth Duke was not born wealthy, you see. He inherited a title, but little else. The family had been declining for generations, and yet, within a decade of assuming the dukedom, he had amassed one of the largest private fortunes in England." I leaned forward. "How?" "That is the question, is it not?" Lady Philippa's voice dropped. "Some say he invested wisely. Others say he married well. His wife Honoria came from money, but there are darker rumors, such as theft, fraud, even murder. She met my gaze, and there was something heavy in her expression. The revolution in France displaced thousands of aristocrats. Many fled with their fortunes, seeking safety in England. Some of them trusted the wrong people. You think the fourth Duke stole from refugees? I think, Lady Philippa said carefully, that a man who builds a secret vault to hide his wealth is a man who fears what might happen if that wealth is examined too closely. The words settled over me like a shroud. If Sebastian Ashford had stolen his fortune from desperate refugees, then the entire Ashford legacy was built on crime. The title, the estate, the diamonds that glittered at Lady Cordelia's throat, all of it was tainted. And Edmund. What would it mean for Edmund if the truth came out? As if summoned by my thoughts, the door opened and the Duke himself entered. He looked tired, I noticed. There were shadows beneath his eyes that had not been there a month ago. "Grandmother," he said, nodding to Lady Philippa. "Miss Thorne." He did not meet my gaze, and I understood why. Lady Cordelia had been watching us more closely than ever. "Edmund," Lady Philippa said, "you look dreadful. Are you sleeping?" "Well enough. Liar." She rose from her chair with the aid of her cane. "I will leave you two to whatever business you have. And Edmund, do try to eat something. You are becoming gaunt." She departed, closing the door behind her with a pointed click. Edmund waited until her footsteps faded before he spoke. "I have news." "What sort of news?" He moved to the window, staring out at the gray December sky. "Mr. Whitmore has been making inquiries, discreet inquiries, about the fourth Duke's business dealings. He has found records that confirm some of what we suspected. The refugees." Edmund nodded slowly. "Sebastian Ashford acted as a banker for French aristocrats fleeing the Terror. They entrusted their fortunes to him for safekeeping, believing he would return their wealth once the danger had passed. But he did not return it. No, he kept everything. Jewels, gold, property deeds, works of art. When the refugees died, some executed, and others simply lost to the chaos, he claimed their assets as his own. Legally, it was almost impossible to challenge. The rightful owners were dead, and their heirs were scattered across Europe or still in hiding. I felt sick. How many families? Whitmore believes at least 24. Edmund's voice was flat, drained of emotion. The fortune in the vault represents the stolen wealth of over 20 aristocratic families who trusted my ancestor to protect them. The weight of it was crushing. I thought of the gold coins, the emeralds, the miniature portraits of unknown women. Those treasures had belonged to real people, people who had fled for their lives and placed their faith in a man who betrayed them utterly. "What will you do?" I asked. Edmund turned from the window. His face was pale, but his jaw was set with determination. "I will find the descendants. I will return what was stolen." That could take years. Decades even. I know, but it is the only honorable course. He crossed the room and stood before me, close enough that I could see the flecks of gray in his storm-colored eyes. I cannot undo what Sebastian did, but I can try to make it right, and I will not build my family's future on a foundation of theft and lies. In that moment, I loved him more than I had ever loved anything. He was choosing integrity over wealth, justice over convenience. He was the opposite of his ancestor in every way that mattered. "The confession," I said, "if we find it, it might contain the names of the families. It might tell us exactly who was wronged. That is my hope." Edmund reached out, and this time he did touch me, his fingers brushing my cheek so gently I might have imagined it. "You have given me so much, Evangeline. Your time, your intelligence, your discretion. I do not know how to thank you. You do not need to thank me." The words came out breathless. "I would do anything for you." His hand stilled against my face. We both knew what I had confessed. The words hung between us, too large and too dangerous to acknowledge directly. "Evangeline," he said, and my name on his lips was a caress. If things were different, but they are not. I stepped back, breaking the contact before I lost all sense. You have a wife, a duty, a name to protect. A wife who does not love me, a duty I never wanted, a name built on stolen fortune. His voice was bitter. What good is any of it? It is your life, I said quietly, and you must live it with honor, even when honor is painful. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, and something in his expression shifted, hardened into resolve. You are right, he said. Of course you are right. Forgive me. There is nothing to forgive. But there was. There was the forgiveness I owed myself for loving him, and the forgiveness he would one day need for loving me back. We were trapped in an impossible situation, bound by duty and propriety and a society that would destroy us both if it knew the truth. I returned to my chamber that evening with a heavy heart. The conversation with Edmund had left me shaken, not because of what he had said, but because of what he had not said. He had almost told me he loved me. I had seen it in his eyes, heard it in the catch of his voice. And I had stopped him, because hearing those words would have broken something inside me that I needed to keep whole. I was sitting before the fire, lost in thought, when a knock came at my door. Enter, I called, expecting one of the maids. The door opened, and Lady Cordelia swept into the room. I rose immediately, my pulse quickening with alarm. The Duchess had never visited my chamber. Her presence here, uninvited and unannounced, could mean nothing good. Your Grace, I said, this is unexpected. Is it? She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, blocking my only exit. Her smile was the smile of a predator. I thought we might have a private conversation, Miss Thorne, woman to woman. I have nothing to say that cannot be said in public. Oh, but I think you do. She moved into the room, her skirts whispering against the floor. I have been watching you and my husband, the looks you share, the secret meetings, the whispered conversations that stop when I enter a room. There is nothing improper between the Duke and myself. Please. Lady Cordelia's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Do not insult my intelligence. I know what you are. A clever, ambitious little nobody who has set her sights on a duke. Did you think I would not notice? You are mistaken, I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. I am not ambitious. I want nothing from your husband. Then explain why he gave you a key he kept hidden for years, a key that you have been using to sneak out of the house in the middle of the night. The blood drained from my face. She knew. Somehow, she knew about the key. Lady Cordelia saw my reaction, and her smile widened. Did you think you were being clever? I have spies everywhere. Miss Thorne, the cook who prepares your meals, the maid who cleans your chamber, even dear Lady Philippa's companion, who reports to me every word the old woman says. I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. The household I had trusted was riddled with her informants. I had been watched, followed, betrayed. What do you want? I asked. I want the vault. Her voice dropped to a hiss. I want to know where it is and what it contains, and you are going to tell me. I cannot. Cannot or will not? Both. I lifted my chin, refusing to cower. The vault does not belong to you. It belongs to the family, and the Duke will decide what to do with it. The Duke. Lady Cordelia's expression twisted with contempt. My husband is a fool who cares more about honor than wealth. He would give away a fortune to salve his conscience. But I will not allow it. That money is mine by right. I am the Duchess of Montclair, and I will not be cheated of what I am owed. She stepped closer, and I saw something dangerous in her eyes, something that went beyond greed into madness. Tell me where the vault is, she said softly, or I will destroy you. I will tell the world that you seduced my husband. I will have you thrown into the street without a reference. I will make certain that no respectable household in England will ever employ you again. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Lady Cordelia waited for a response, and when none came, Her expression hardened into fury. "Very well," she said. "You have made your choice. But remember, Miss Thorne, I gave you the chance to save yourself." She turned and left, slamming the door behind her. I stood alone in my chamber, trembling with a fear I could not name. Lady Cordelia would make good on her threats. She would destroy my reputation, my livelihood, my very future, and there was nothing I could do to stop her, unless I found the confession first. If the fourth Duke's crimes were exposed, Lady Cordelia's position would become precarious. The fortune she coveted would be tainted, possibly forfeit. She would have no power over me if the truth rendered her schemes meaningless. I had to find that confession. Tonight. I waited until the house fell silent, until even the servants had retired to their quarters. Then I took my shawl and my lantern and slipped out into the darkness. The chapel was cold and still, the moonlight painting the windows in shades of silver and blue. I descended the stairs into the vault and began to search with a desperation I had never felt before. Hours passed. My fingers grew numb, my eyes blurred with exhaustion. I searched every chest, every compartment, every hidden corner. And then, just as dawn began to lighten the sky above, I found it. Behind one of the miniature portraits, concealed in a niche carved into the stone, was a small leather case. Inside was a document, yellowed with age but still legible. I held it up to the lantern and read the first line. "I, Sebastian Ashford, Duke of Montclair, do hereby confess to the crimes I have committed against God and man." I had found it at last, and what it contained would change everything. The Duke gave his wife the diamonds, but handed the governess a rusty key. It opened the 50 Minotaur's Vault, Chapter 5. The confession of Sebastian Ashford was worse than anything I had imagined. I read it by lantern light in the cold vault, my hands trembling as the fourth Duke's elegant script revealed the depths of his depravity. He had not merely stolen from refugees, he had orchestrated their deaths. When the aristocrats fleeing France entrusted him with their fortunes, he had promised them safety, promised to hold their wealth until the terror passed and they could return to claim it. But Sebastian Ashford had no intention of returning anything. He hired men to intercept the refugees as they traveled, to murder them and dispose of their bodies so that no one would ever come seeking what he had taken. 23 families. 23 families wiped from existence so that one man could build a dynasty on their graves. The confession listed their names: the Comte de Valois, the Marquise de Beaufort, Baron Renard and his wife and their 2 servants, a widow named Madame Lefebvre, who had trusted Sebastian because he had once been her husband's friend. Each name was a ghost, a life extinguished for gold. I wept as I read. I wept for the dead, for the injustice that had gone unpunished for nearly a century. And I wept for Edmund, who would have to carry the weight of this knowledge for the rest of his life. When dawn broke, I climbed out of the vault and made my way back to the house. I did not try to hide. I no longer cared who saw me. Edmund was waiting in the library. He looked as though he had not slept, and when he saw my face, he knew. "You found it," he said. I handed him the confession without a word. He read it slowly, his expression shifting from concentration to horror, to something that looked like grief. When he finished, he set the document down and stared at the fire burning in the grate. "Murder," he said quietly. "My ancestor was a murderer." "Yes." He was silent for a long time. Then he turned to face me, and I saw that his eyes were wet. "What do I do now, Evangeline? How do I make this right?" I moved to stand beside him, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. "You cannot undo what he did, but you can honor the dead by telling the truth. You can find their descendants and return what was stolen. You can ensure that the Ashford name stands for justice, even if it cannot stand for innocence. The world will know what my family built itself on. Yes, and they will know that you were the one who chose to expose it." He turned to look at me, and in his gaze I saw something I had never seen before. Not gratitude, not even love, though that was there too. I saw respect. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known," he said. Before I could respond, the library door burst open and Lady Cordelia swept in, followed by Mr. Whitmore and Lady Philippa. The Duchess's face was flushed with triumph, and she pointed at me with an accusatory finger. "There she is," she declared. "The thief. The seductress. I demand that she be removed from this house immediately." Edmund stepped forward, placing himself between his wife and me. "What is the meaning of this, Cordelia?" "The meaning is that your precious governess has been sneaking around the estate in the middle of the night. She has been meeting with you in secret. She has stolen a key that belongs to this family." Lady Cordelia's voice rose to a pitch that bordered on hysteria. "I will not be made a fool of, Edmund. I will not stand by while you carry on an affair under my very roof." "There is no affair," Edmund said coldly. "Miss Thorne has been helping me with a matter of family business." "Family business." Lady Cordelia laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Is that what you call it? Then explain why she has been searching the house like a woman possessed. Explain why you gave her a key that you kept hidden even from me." Edmund glanced at me, then at Mr. Whitmore. "I think," he said slowly, "that it is time for the truth." He retrieved the confession from where it lay on the table and handed it to the solicitor. "Read this aloud, if you please. My wife wishes to understand our family business. Let her understand it fully." Mr. Whitmore adjusted his spectacles and began to read. As the fourth Duke's words filled the room, I watched Lady Cordelia's expression change. The triumph faded, replaced first by confusion, then by dawning horror. When the reading was finished, silence hung over the library like a shroud. "This cannot be true," Lady Cordelia whispered. "The Ashford fortune, the jewels, everything." "Everything was stolen," Edmund said. "Stolen from innocent people who were murdered for their wealth. The diamonds you wear to every ball, Cordelia, belong to a French countess who was killed on English soil by men my ancestor hired." Lady Cordelia's hand flew to her throat, where a rope of pearls gleamed against her pale skin. "No, I do not believe it. It does not matter what you believe." Edmund's voice was hard. "The confession is genuine. Mr. Whitmore has verified the handwriting, and I intend to make full restitution to the descendants of every family my ancestor wronged." "Restitution?" Lady Cordelia stared at him as though he had gone mad. "You mean to give away the fortune? All of it? As much as is necessary to right the wrong. But that would ruin us. We would be paupers. I would have nothing. You would have the Ashford estate, which was never part of the stolen wealth. You would have the income from the lands, which is considerable. You would have more than most people could dream of." Edmund's expression softened slightly, though not with warmth. "But you would not have £50 million to spend on gowns and jewels and the admiration of society. Is that what troubles you, Cordelia? The loss of your luxuries?" Lady Cordelia's face contorted with fury. "You self-righteous fool. You would destroy everything for the sake of people who died 100 years ago. People no one remembers. People who do not matter." "They matter to me," Edmund said quietly. "And they should matter to you." Lady Philippa, who had been silent throughout, stepped forward. She moved slowly, leaning on her cane, but her eyes were sharp as they fixed on her grandson's wife. "Cordelia," she said, "I have tolerated you for 5 years because my grandson chose you. I have watched you spend his money, neglect his happiness, and scheme for your own advancement. I have said nothing because it was not my place to interfere. But I will say something now." She paused, and her voice hardened. "You are not worthy of the Ashford name. You never were." Lady Cordelia turned on the old woman with venom in her eyes. "How dare you speak to me that way? I am the Duchess of Montclair." "You are a duchess in title only," Lady Philippa replied. "A true duchess would stand beside her husband in his hour of need. A true duchess would care for justice more than jewels. But you, Cordelia, care for nothing but yourself." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Cordelia looked around the room, at Edmund's implacable face, at Lady Philippa's contempt, at Mr. Whitmore's carefully neutral expression, and finally at me. I saw something break in her eyes, some final illusion shattering. "Very well," she said, and her voice was cold and flat. "If you wish to destroy the family fortune, I cannot stop you, but I will not stay to watch." She turned and walked out of the library without another word. Edmund let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. "Let her go," he said when Mr. Whitmore moved to follow. "She will return to her family. Perhaps they will teach her what I could not." Over the following weeks, the household transformed. Lady Cordelia departed for her family's estate in Sussex, taking her personal belongings and a generous settlement that Edmund insisted upon despite everything. She did not ask for the diamonds. I think she could not bear to touch them, knowing what they represented. Mr. Whitmore threw himself into the monumental task of tracing the descendants of Sebastian Ashford's victims. It would take years, he warned us, perhaps decades. But Edmund was determined, and the solicitor's initial inquiries revealed that many of the families had surviving branches scattered across Europe. The first restitution was made in February to a schoolteacher in Lyon, who was the great-granddaughter of Madame Lefebvre. She wept when she received the letter explaining what had happened to her ancestor. And she wept again when she learned that the Ashford family was returning her inheritance. "It was not about the money," she wrote back. "It was about knowing the truth at last." Edmund read her letter aloud to me in the library, and I saw the burden on his shoulders lighten, just a little. "This is right," he said. "This is what we should have done long ago. You could not have done it without the confession," I reminded him. "And your ancestors chose to bury it rather than face the shame. Then I am grateful for their cowardice." He smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I had seen from him in months. If they had destroyed the confession, we would never have known the truth. As winter turned to spring, something else changed as well. The distance between Edmund and me, the careful propriety we had maintained for so long, began to dissolve. With Lady Cordelia gone, the house felt different, lighter, as though a shadow had been lifted. Lady Philippa noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "You are spending a great deal of time together," she observed one afternoon. "You and my grandson." "He values my assistance with the restitution project," I said carefully. The dowager's eyes twinkled. "Is that what the young people call it these days?" I felt my cheeks flush. "Your Grace, I would never presume." "Child." She reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "I am not accusing you of anything. I am merely observing that my grandson is happier than he has been in years. And I am observing that you are the cause." I did not know how to respond. Lady Philippa patted my hand. Edmund's marriage to Cordelia was a mistake. We all knew it, even at the time. But he was determined to do his duty, and she was determined to become a duchess. It was a transaction, not a union. She paused. "But you, Evangeline, you love him for who he is, not for what he can give you." "I do," I whispered. "God help me. I do." "Then do not run from it." Lady Philippa released my hand and leaned back in her chair. "Life is short, and love is rare. When you find it, you must hold on with both hands." That evening, Edmund asked me to walk with him in the garden. The spring air was soft and fragrant, and the first roses were beginning to bloom along the stone walls. We walked in silence for a while, our footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Then Edmund stopped beside a marble fountain, where water sparkled in the fading light. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the future." "Oh?" He turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression that made my heart stop. "Cordelia has agreed to a formal separation," he said. "It will take time, and there will be scandal. But she has no desire to remain married to a man who is giving away her fortune." "I understand," I said, though I did not understand at all. Edmund took my hands in his. His fingers were warm, and they trembled slightly. "Evangeline," he said, "I have loved you for 5 years. I have loved you in silence, in secret, in the depths of my heart where no one could see. I have watched you move through this house like a light in the darkness, and I have wanted nothing more than to tell you what you mean to me." Tears blurred my vision. "Edmund, I know that I am not free, not yet, but I will be. And when I am, I want to ask you properly. I want to court you as you deserve to be courted. I want to give you everything I have, not just the rusted key and the burden of my family's secrets, but my name, my heart, my future." He paused, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "Will you wait for me, Evangeline? Will you let me earn the right to love you?" I could not speak. The words were too large, too overwhelming. So instead, I answered the only way I could. I rose on my toes and pressed my lips to his. It was a gentle kiss, soft and brief and achingly sweet. But in that moment, every barrier between us crumbled. Every rule, every restriction, every reason we had kept our distance, none of it mattered anymore. When we parted, Edmund rested his forehead against mine. "Is that a yes?" he asked, and there was wonder in his voice. "That is a yes," I said. "That has always been a yes." We stood together in the garden as the sun set and the stars emerged, one by one, to witness what we had finally allowed ourselves to become. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be scandal and whispers and the slow, painful process of untangling Edmund's marriage. There would be years of work to complete the restitution, years of tracking down descendants and returning stolen wealth. The Ashford fortune would diminish, and with it, the family's standing in society. But I did not care about any of that. I cared about the man who held my hands in the twilight, the man who had trusted me with a rusted key and the heaviest secret of his life. I cared about the future we would build together, not on stolen gold, but on honesty and love and the determination to make right what had been wrong for a century. The fourth Duke had hidden his sins in a vault beneath a chapel, believing they would never be found. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and justice has a way of prevailing, even when it takes 100 years. I came to Ashford Hall as a governess, a woman without fortune or prospects, expecting nothing but honest work. I never imagined I would find a treasure beyond price. Not the gold in the vault, the love of a good man who saw my worth when no one else did. And that, I have come to believe, is the only fortune that truly matters.